it's not meaningful just to talk about COVID-19 as if it's got everything related to it. There is an educational philosophy, as we talked about before, and then we have to think how that can be applied in COVID-19 times. Similarly, there is a lot to say about the family and in the educational sphere, the family as an educational site. And I will be talking about that in general, while talking precisely about the COVID-19 period that we are going through. There is amazingly little research on the family in the realm of Indian education. So much of what I have to say is based on my own research, which has been going on for 40 years, longer than the organization Nirman. But while Nirman was in action, while it was alive, we had a wonderful project from IDPAD, as it was called, Indo-Dutch IDPAD, Projects in Alternative Development. And that project funded us for 3 years of research on the family as an educational site. So thanks to them, we got a lot of data. And in our own school, we apply much of that research and continue to carry it on. And I hope that this talk will motivate and inspire some of you to do research of your own on the family, if you are educators. And if you are, of course, not, then to think about all those questions. Let's see, let me tell you about 3 or 4 different kinds of families in order to bring home some points about the Indian family. Each family is different. And in India particularly, that seems to be a factor of caste or subcaste, what is called jati or biradari. But in an interesting way, which is not always known to everyone, we tend to use stereotypes. We tend to think that we know what we are talking about, if we think about it at all. Many of us don't like to get into anything to do with caste. But if we do, if we are sociologically inclined or for whatever reason, one of the interesting and less known things is something that was brought home to me from a novel that I'm working on called Udhar Ke Log. And that's about a Dalit family. Now, you would think from the outside that a Dalit family is a Dalit family and you can more or less plot its characteristics. What the novel brings home is that there are as many differentiations among Dalit families as there may be between Dalit and non-Dalit families. In other words, people are really aware of what their family's history and practices and ideologies are. If they are one kind of Khatik or another kind of Khatik, if they are one kind of Chamar or another kind of Chamar, and the same is true of Kayas or Brahmins or, I don't know, or the whole range of different kinds of castes. So caste is an empty category. What really matters is the family practice, and the family is very proud of its differences. Now, at the same time, I am going to generalize a bit. I want to do that in a reversed hierarchical way. So I'm going to talk about some working class, poorer families first, then about aspiring middle class families, and finally about well-established sort of upper middle class families, 3 rungs of the ladder. Let me begin with 2 children, Govind and Gopal. They are in kindergarten, that means they're 5 years old. They must be twins because they're both that age and in the same class. They live in a neighborhood of Banaras, where I do my research, which is predominantly Brahmin and Malla. So there's a combination of those who are boatmen and fishermen and those who are priests and ritual specialists. Govind and Gopal go to a local school that calls itself a public school. It's one of those that I classify as aspiring to be a public school. So it's private, it's English medium, it's CBSE. It doesn't belong to the National Association of Public Schools or anything like that, but it does have that in its name. What it means in practice is that Govind and Gopal are sitting at home with their grandmother, Dadi, when I visit, and she's trying to make them learn up their ABCs and their 1, 2, 3s and some colors and some animal names in English, because according to their diary, they have a test coming up in a week on precisely this content. She doesn't know what UKG means, which is the class that they belong to. And she's not, she's not someone who has grown up in this kind of vocabulary which she's teaching. But one thing she's sure of, that if she works with these two kids, they are going to succeed, whatever else might happen. So she's really, pressing hard on them. And they, being 5-year-old, are running amok. And watching them, I have to conclude that the family they come from, as I said, an old Brahmin family, very rooted in classical Hindu traditions. They have a rather beautiful, formal temple inside their home. They perform various rituals, both professionally and aesthetically, to one's great pleasure. They are a highly structured family, but in this generation, they seem to be in the process of losing many of their traditions, because all that the family can think of is the school's agenda for the child, and the school, unfortunately, has not devised a very interesting or imaginative agenda, going by what I see is happening, what their bags contain in terms of textbooks and notebooks, and what is written in the diaries. So in this generation, the family will have lost much of its structure and ethical moorings, and have gained curiously little in return. Let me look at another family, which is an artisan family. And the mother, called Mangra, is someone I've known from her birth. She has a son also in kindergarten, Vikas. And Vikas not only goes to school during the day, he goes to yet another school after he comes back, because she has kept a tutor for him. And the tutor comes religiously and helps him with all his homework and tutors him to master it better, and then gives him more homework. So he's factually going to 3 schools, if you like. Now, Vikas is reported by his mother as being very destructive. Unfortunately, she says, and in his presence, "Ye to bahut harami hai, dusht hai, shaitan hai, sunta nahi hai, baithta nahi hai." Meaning, he's a rascal, he makes trouble, he won't sit, he won't listen. And Vikas is reported to be destructive in the sense that he loves to draw, but he'll tear up his drawings, he'll tear up his work, he just won't do the work. And again, one can make a fairly easy conclusion. It's because of the boring and repetitive work. And he is totally capable of much more advanced work and much more stimulating creative work than what his school is giving and what the mother is assuming is the mandate for her to follow. The third kind of family, it belongs to the same kind, which is working class, and is Rafia and Zarina's. And in that, the children are going to a madrasa, not to a school, but because they go to a madrasa, which actually takes up only 3 or 4 hours of their time, they're not supposed to do any other thing at home. They're totally categorized as school-going children. And the idea of such families is that the school, of course, must dictate all of one's time. Now, they are pretty happy because the day I visit them, it's a rainy day, so they don't have to go anywhere. And they're sitting there playing with homemade cards out of cardboard and giggling and laughing and perfectly happy. In these 3 families, all 3 working class that I mentioned, the first one might have an old inherited house of some comfort. The second one lives within a room or 2. And the third one is extremely cramped. All the children, 5 of them, and the parents all live within one room, and everything else is open to the elements. The children don't seem to mind it in the least. They are perfectly comfortable. That's all the world they know. And in all honesty, their childhood worlds are as happy as any you could imagine. So before moving on to the middle class family, I just quickly want to draw a few connections here. What I'm saying is that in the case of the working class families who want a modern education for their children, which is by today's statistics pretty much almost all of working class people, in that case, they are curiously willing to bow down before the dictates of the school. They humble themselves. They are ready to acknowledge their ignorance. They say, we simply don't know, we'll do whatever you tell us. And in that process, the school demonstrates itself to be relatively, quote unquote, unschooled, uneducated, incapable of delivering something that would be of developmental value to the child. And I would go so far as to say that in this kind of scenario, the parents or grandparents who did not even go to formal schools were better off in a sense. They had more stimulating, holistic lifestyles, and the children at present have relatively impoverished lifestyles, and they are losing out on the ethics and skills of their families, as well as something that the school could provide, but it does not. The middle class family example that I want to take is from Bengal. It's from one side of my own family, being married into a Bengali clan. Lots and lots of bodhis and dadas and nanads. And forgive me for using you all as data. But in the case of this family which values education probably above anything else, the father and mother make sure that nothing can go wrong in the education of the child, nothing literally. Whether it means that the child is woken up, harshly from an afternoon nap, or they are fed things they don't want at odd hours they don't want, or they're made to sit, stand, walk, whatever. Everything has to be in the right path for education. The father literally sits down for several hours and helps with some subjects. The mother is not supposed to be able to help with subjects per se, but she keeps the wheels of the home greased and spinning, and everything is perfectly oiled and functioning, such as the snacks and tea for everyone, and keeping the sound down on the pressure cooker even while she's cooking. The final kind of family is, again, from my own example, another side of my clan, and they are also wedded to the capital of education and the knowledge that they can only succeed if they have that, not having land, property, or anything else. So there is no question of ever failing, indeed of ever even coming second, as it's called. You have to top all the time. You have to be on, a master of every possible way of doing it. So that in my own childhood, my mother, to whom I would very humbly like to dedicate this talk, everything, literally everything that I am is because of my mother. So that aside, but she had an interesting pedagogical streak. She would, right from, age 5 or 6, make me rewrite every single thing I'd done in school, and then learn it up, and then write it again, and then recite it to her, until if you are docile as a child, you start doing it as a habit, and then you get addicted to success, and you think that's what you have to do. You have to get everything right all the time and complete all the work. And if you're not docile, as many, many children are, then there is this ongoing tension and conflict which everyone knows about, where the parents are demanding and requesting and blackmailing and bribing the children, please, please, please do this, complete the work, or I'm going to shoot myself, or shoot you, or God knows what else will ensue. And the child, like a normal child, is protesting, negotiating, maneuvering, trying to assert their identity. So in these two families, success at the educational level or at the formal schooling level is definitely guaranteed. However, the losses are unaccounted for. And one more thing that I want to mention, which is very interesting as a contrast between the two kinds of families, working class and middle class, is that in the middle class families, just the opposite of what I described to the working class families happens. That is, they actually manage to carve out the time and space and get the teachers needed to fill in all the gaps that they think exist in the school. So whether it be Kathak or Bharatnatyam or classical music or swimming or horse riding or, in my case, the piano, whatever it is, has to be taught to the child. And if tennis is suddenly found lacking, then tennis is also shoved in one summer. And by so doing, the product that emerges in these families has all the marks of a very wonderfully educated liberal arts product. So much so that the rest of the world is completely fooled and thinks, wow, the educational system in India must be terrific. Not recognizing that some families in India are really, really dedicated to the educational enterprise of modernity. And this is precisely what the working class family in India lacks. I wanted to give a historical contextualization here. And in that, I wanted to speak about how the problem of the Indian family arises at the time of colonialism. Because in the colonial period, the British saw Indian people, which means Indian families, as backward and as lacking in many important modern values, and they had to be reformed. And one of the agencies of reform was the school. The workplace was another, but even prior to that, and equally important, if not more so, was the school. So the school, right from the beginning, has a very tense relationship with the family. The family is the backward unit in this relationship. It is superstitious and dogmatic and old-fashioned and dedicated to all kinds of other cultural practices which may not be modern or secular. And the school is scientific and progressive and is going to lead the nation to its new universal grand kind of status. So the school is the reforming agency and the family is the target of reform. And post-independence, we have not changed this relationship. We are, excuse me, we are very comfortable as educators in quickly blaming the family or the background of the child when the child is unsuccessful. The proportion would be probably 99.99 to the rest. If I was to count how many times an educator has told me that the reason for a child's failure is the family background of the child, as compared to ever an educator saying, oh, maybe we don't know how to teach this child, or maybe we have to devise other methods of teaching this child. So let's look at some ways to attack this problem. And before we suggest any solutions, we should really make sure that the problem is very clear, very clearly defined. So I'm talking about two things. On the one hand, I'm talking about a disparity, a difference in the population of India. I'm saying that there are different kinds of families, and mostly the division is according to economic status, except that it's very much a discourse that we have put in place. And the discourse is something at one level we have to be proud of. It's a modern or modernist discourse relying on the Constitution of India. And we are this secular democratic nation which promises equality for all citizens. And the reason and the way to make that happen successfully is, as our leader Bhimrao Ambedkar suggested, is to have some kind of an ethical commitment to the Constitution and to democracy. So on the one hand, the problem is of difference, even while we want to struggle towards equality. But on the other hand, the problem is simply one of lack of knowledge of the other, which is put into place because of our colonial past, which we haven't sought to reform. So how do we tackle this? And I want to just evoke the USA briefly, partly in solidarity, since they're going through such a difficult time themselves. You know about the racial events there, and the fact that so many people there, just like us, are raising their voice in protest against the government, against one other stream in the public who thinks this is not problematic. But basically there's profiling, there's categorizing, and therefore there is victimizing of one section of the population, which is the African Americans or Blacks. So in the US, there has been a lot of research and a lot of really brilliant work done on this problem of difference. And it's not a very different problem to ours. We do not have races, and we are not of different races. And certainly we cannot recognize any races, and it's not part of our discourse. But there is a quasi-racist way of differentiating, or quasi-casteist way of differentiating in our country, which is very slurred and fuzzy, and therefore difficult to attack and talk about, but I want to describe it. So in the US, the earlier way of understanding the problem was as genetic difference or a genetic kind of deficiency. And Blacks African Americans were simply categorized as being lower, genetically inferior than other races, which moved on somewhere in the 60s to a cultural kind of categorization of deficiency. So there was no longer any popularity to the genetic explanation, but these African-American poor working class families were categorized as being intellectually, socially, psychologically, and resources and lifestyles to their children, hence the failure of the children in schools. I would say that we are at somewhat that level of interpretation in our country. We actually very comfortably find ourselves talking or listening to others talk about how working class people or poor people or those who live in slums, etc., provide a very weak and poor, barren kind of lifestyle and support system to their children. In other words, they are, compared to us, culturally, socially, and psychologically deficient. I want to suggest that in the times of COVID-19, these problems are all being heightened, in fact. Poor families are actually very poor. There's no way to get around it. I've described living in 1 or 2 rooms. I've described the lack of resources. But if you remember, I also mentioned that children seem to be unaware of these so-called deficiencies. I'm just quickly going to recapitulate the last thing so that we continue on the same track. I was saying that in the time of COVID-19, most of the problems and pressures on the family have only increased. Which means what? Which means poverty has increased. So the tension or the pressure felt by parents as to how to provide for basic things is much greater. The modernist discourse that we function within has not changed at all. It has become only heightened because we are talking so glibly about technology and how to do online this and that and the other, including ordering foodstuffs and shopping, etc. So given that modernist discourse, as I call it, the pressure on some families to perform or live in this society when they actually are not part of that discourse and they don't function according to those kinds of practices and values is unimaginable. So they often just avoid being participants. They keep to their own groups and circles. They fade out, as it were, of the discourse altogether. This part of this is the expectations that educators might have of children being able to participate in online classes and being able to be part of groups or engage in discussions, watch lectures, watch videos, etc. It's not possible for many, many parents. And if it was not possible before, it's become even more difficult now because of the economic and other hardships. So I want to now, after giving all these depressing kinds of insights, analyses, and data, talk about a few possible solutions. The first one would be to try to change this discourse a bit. And it starts with changing the language. I know that we present in this company are probably not guilty of it, But if you listen closely, a lot of people are very glib about characterizing some people as the other and talking about them as somehow deficient. And just yesterday, when talking to an educator, I heard the same categories which I've been used to hearing all the time, which is that some people are गिरे हुए, पिछड़े हुए, निम्न लोग, छोटे लोग. What they mean is actually not very specific. They don't mean caste, they don't mean religion, they don't mean, of course, race or ethnicity. They mean something abstract, such as a tautology, like those who can't study, can't study. And the proof of a child's backwardness is that the child can't study. So many of us who are not parties of this kind of talk still err by maybe being very condescending, trying to be very kind to the poor, trying to show our concern for them. That's also a problem. The only thing that would work is an actual belief in equality, an actual acceptance that no matter what the differences, we are actually all equal and we are all Indian citizens, part of one population. The school, the home is very problematic in this respect. Almost in every family, there is a tendency to blame the child in an essentialist way. That means as if the child had some characteristics that were given and unchangeable. So I already mentioned poor Mangra talking about Vikas as harami, dosht, shaitan. These are common terms used by everyone. And in the presence of the child, he is criticized and categorized as being blameworthy for things that comes naturally to him at his age, or that he may be trying to express as peculiar to his personality, or that he or she might simply be doing in fun to make your family laugh or enjoy themselves with you, such as standing on a chair and balancing backwards and falling over, etc., or making fun of you for presenting a very to recite that or to perform that and so on. So the family is full of abuse, verbal abuse, of cynicism and sarcasm and categorizations, which the child simply does not deserve. And our attitude at this time when we are interacting with the child located in the family should be to work against this language, work against our own language if it's problematic in any way, but try to work against the family's own language when they report to us what the child has done or not done, including completing the work which we set for the child. Is actually a huge task for educators, so get ready. We need in our country to make many, many more resources than we have at present. Take the case of animals, for instance. We do not have enough images of Indian animals to use. We do not produce them. We do not write about them. We do not fantasize about them. We do not spin stories about them. We do not create artwork with them. If it comes to the worst, we use as a default option something that exists in the West. We use their stories, we use their images, we use everything that's beautiful and wonderful, but it was all produced in the West as a product of their own history and culture. There are two kinds of rabbits. There's what Beatrix Potter wrote about, and that is Peter Rabbit. And she probably looked at the meadows and the countryside that she used to live in and was a very beautiful illustrator. So she drew and painted and wrote very feelingly about the lives of rabbits, ducks, frogs. And the other kind of rabbit is what Lewis Carroll writes about when there is a rabbit with a clock and he says, I'm getting late, I'm getting late. And he rushes off and is followed by Alice, who falls through a big hole and lands in Fantasyland, right? Wonderland. So what are these products of? How do they write about rabbits? And in India, who do we write about, if anyone? I think if we were to try and do anything, we would first become very moralistic, and we'd lecture to the village child about his cows and get him to count cows, instead of, addressing him about flying cows, or dragon-like cows, or dinosaur-like cows, or whatever else we could think of, or cows in some kind of wonderland, the cow queen and so on. What I'm getting at is that we need to produce resources which are a combination of the local, from our own lives and observations, and which will make sense to the children because this is the life all around them, especially in these secluded times. But at the same time, we need to really exercise our imaginations and get into fantasy. The local is not the solution. Everyone knows that there is a core knowledge in the world, and that consists of the fantastical, and that's where we have to go. And we can learn as much as we like from the example of the West. But given that we have historically been dominated, and that we were slumbering for 200 years because we were dominated, we have to work specially hard now and labor specially hard to overcome that period of loss. So whoever we are, whether we are just ordinary teachers, but if we are potential writers, illustrators, any kind of artists, whatever we can do, we should be busy doing it, or team up with those who are doing it, and try in our own smallest way possible to make some kind of resource for our children at these times. That resource should be tapping into the families and communities and neighborhoods and homes of the children, even while we can exercise our imagination as much as we like and tap into their own worlds of imagination. And the final two solutions, if I can use that term, one is that teachers themselves need more workshops at this time. A teacher is ultimately primarily the product of the education and training they have themselves received. And if you study that, which I have done in my research, you find how deficient that is. There are so many things that they are not exercised and encouraged to do when they are getting their teacher's training or their degrees. So they should do continuous workshops, educate themselves. There is no science to this. There is no formula as to how to get out of a rut. If you were the product of a certain kind of schooling, how do you escape it? Only self-education, self-reflection, understanding where you come from, what is your history. And Indian history is very important, Indian educational history. Teachers in India were powerful, and they were full of resources, and they were full of imagination and creativity. So that's where we are. That's our legacy, not this colonial one, which should vanish as soon as we can make it vanish. We at Nirman, of course, try to do a lot of it. And once the COVID crisis is over, we hope to get to it with a bang, and also offer more things to outsiders, such as theater, which is a wonderful way to work with teachers and to make them get out of their shells and limitations and see themselves as potentially much more capable than they think they might be. But even during the COVID-19 times, we hope to put together some more training units and have those available for teachers. And corresponding to that, we have to have parents' workshops. If the child is located in the site of the family in these times, then the parents are more key than you realize, because they are the ones who the child is exposed to all day, all night, not just in the few hours away from school as used to be the case. So everything that the parents do is going to have an impact on the child as never before. And we cannot blind ourselves to it. We have to produce more material which addresses parents. Again, we are trying to do that. We are in the middle of doing that. And for that, the first thing is, please take your parents and your families seriously. Try to figure out what are their backgrounds and professions. Who are they? What kind of a home does your child presently find him and herself located in? What's going on there? Use that as resources, use that in your discourse, use that to think about the child while we're doing this online teaching. To conclude, remember, we educators, are not a different category of people. We are all members of the same communities. We all come from similar families. There is no dividing line between the student's family and us. We are all the same people who have simply become professionally an educator. So professionally, it behooves us to be more educated in what the times demand, both in making materials and resources, but also in changing our understanding, our discourse, and our diagnosis of what's going on in the location, present location of the child. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Nita ma'am, for the talk. We will now be moving on to our question and answers round. So please feel free to post your questions in the chat box and we will take them one by one. Because there was a little bit of a technical problem in between. If you would like Nita ma'am to elaborate on something that you might not have understood because the voice was not clear, please post that as well. We will have to extend the session by a few more minutes to make sure that we get a full value out of the question and answer round as well. So we will be extending the session by 10 more minutes. Please feel free to add your questions now in the chat box, and it would be really interesting to see the discussion and how it goes forward. Thank you. Okay, Nita ma'am, we have one question to start with, maybe two questions. I'll put a little bit over there. This is by Mr. Hariom. It's in Hindi. So, इस दौर में बच्चों के मानसिक तनाव को दूर करने के लिए शिक्षक को क्या उपाय करना चाहिए is one of the questions. Next is by Ms. Jyoti, and she wants you to elaborate a little bit on the context of children's life and its implications for the classroom. So maybe if you can give that with an example, because your talk was essentially about the context of children in the classrooms. But maybe if you can give it with an example. Should I add one more question or yeah? Oh, you are muted. You're muted, Nita ma'am.
Let me answer these two questions first. Yeah. The second one, how to give a context of children's lives in our educational work, right? In our teaching. A very simple example that occurs to me is from witnessing what happens in class 1 classroom. And the children, as would be the case in class 1, it's an English class, were being introduced to simple questions and answers, right? What do you read? I read this book. Do you read this book? Yes, I read this book, etc. Now, the children were all from weavers' families. The school is located in a weavers' neighborhood. And there may have been many other kinds of children, but predominantly the student body was from weavers' families. Now, weavers have a very complex, intricate professional life at home because all the weaving is done at home and the child is completely exposed to it day and night. And it's a little absurd for the school to not ever, ever, ever mention this fact in all the curriculum of all the classes, etc., that's present in the classroom. And the reason for this is because, as I said before, we perform modernity. We accept this discourse of modernity and the curriculum of what we imagine is a modern curriculum, and just repeat it, imitate it. We mold it sometimes to something we think is important in terms of religion, especially. In this case, actually, the questions must have seemed to them very innovative and creative, because it was, do you read the Quran? Yes, I read the Quran, that kind of thing. And that's fine, that's a good step forward. But the point is, they're working class people. They have a profession which is practiced domestically. There is a certain kind of set of artifacts in the home called the loom. There is a certain set of structures and practices. So why not try to teach literacy, the first steps of sentence making, questions and answers, with reference to different kinds of professions that the children already know. None of them sits around reading a book. So to introduce the first verb as to read is really, a little odd, and we all know where it comes from. We were all not bursting with creativity from our birth. And, I really don't want to signal out anyone as being deficient in creativity, etc. We all have to struggle through it. But, it needs thinking about how to actually take seriously the kind of lives our children lead, and to use that when teaching simply nouns, verbs, adjectives, or whatever it is we are trying to teach them. The second question was, बच्चों के मानसिक तनाव के बारे में क्या करना चाहिए? मानसिक तनाव बच्चों का तभी होता है, हरिओम, जब उनके बड़े लोगों का तनाव होता है. वो उसको देख के समझ जाते हैं कि अब तनाव एक्सपीरियंस करना चाहिए. अपने में बच्चों को कोई तनाव नहीं है. उनको यही तनाव है कि अब हम बड़े हो रहे हैं, हमारी मसल्स डेवलप कर रही हैं, हमारा दिमाग डेवलप कर रहा है. उसके लिए अब क्या चैलेंज है, उस चैलेंज को कैसे समझें, अब क्या सीखें, अब क्या बने, अब क्या बढ़ें आगे. लेकिन बच्चों के चारों तरफ तो बड़े लोग होते हैं जिनको वो लोग देखते रहते हैं बहुत बारीकी से. कोई चीज उनकी नजर से छुपी नहीं होती है. तो जब बड़े लोग आपस में बहस कर रहे हैं और एक दूसरे को बुरा भला कह रहे हैं कि तुमने ये किया तो तुमने ये किया, और तुम ऐसे हो वैसे हो, और ये नहीं सोचते, ये नहीं याद रखते, तो बच्चों को कैसा लगता है? उनको तो बहुत ज्यादा तनाव महसूस होता है. तो इसके लिए एक ही तरीका है कि जो हमेशा होना चाहिए, कोविड-19 में थोड़ा ज्यादा ही होना चाहिए, लेकिन इस वक्त बहुत जरूरी है क्योंकि सब लोग एक घोंसले में बंद हैं. तो वो यही तरीका है कि अपने बारे में सोचते रहें ना, कि हम लोग किस तरह से प्रस्तुत अपने को कर रहे हैं, है ना, और अपना तनाव थोड़ा सा अपने काबू में रखें. तनाव सब महसूस कर रहे हैं ऊपर से नीचे तक, लेकिन कम से कम बच्चों को थोड़ा सा उससे सुरक्षित रखने की कोशिश कर सकते हैं. I'll quickly summarize in English because it was a very interesting question which said, how should we take care of the tensions that a child might experience at these times? And my thinking on this is that a child is actually so preoccupied with their internal developments, which have to do with motor skills and linguistic and all kinds of other processes that are going on really at a rapid rate inside them. And that is what is preoccupying them. If you observe children by themselves, not in connection with adults, you'll see that. The kind of tension that you might be worrying about that children experience is a reflection of adults' tension. So the best answer to that question is that for adults to be a little more careful about the language they use in front of children, how they express their own tensions and how they relate to each other, and try to blame each other and criticize each other and so on. And then, here's another point, and then deny to the child that anything is going wrong. Please don't belittle the child by telling the child everything is fine, you just imagined it. The child did not imagine it. The child is very aware that something is wrong. So please take the child a little bit into confidence and speak a little bit as an equal and say, actually, yes, mama or papa did get very upset because, this and this and this is going wrong, but we are going to take care of it. And it'll be all right. It's not all right right now, but it will be all right. Okay, so don't make them feel that they are fools for having observed something either.
Okay, thank you so much, Nita ma'am. So on the same topic, there are a few more questions. I'm going to summarize them together and maybe you can elaborate them with probably strategies or something. One is about how teachers can address emotional needs of children, but perhaps you can bridge it with how teachers can speak with their families to bridge the emotional needs, because they are more connected right now than teachers and children. Second is also, how can you reduce stress for children? perhaps with the whole changing dynamic of their learning, stress levels are increasing for children. So how can you manage that as a teacher? That is one of the topics that of the few more questions have been raised related to the same. And there's another one question. I think you will find it very interesting. It's by Sanjay Sharma, that how to strike a balance between formal schooling, KVS schooling of my children, and my own progressive outlook on education. So how do you balance opposing views about your own experiences and about your own thoughts about education now? Um, should I add one more question?
No, please.
Yeah. Okay.
All
Yes.
right. No, they're very, very interesting questions. Thank you. And I really wish we could have a long discussion on any of these. They're such rich, interesting, and important questions. So how can teachers address the emotional needs of children? I think just with, a couple of words, by being very supportive, always beginning by asking something, saying something regarding the actual experiences of children, wherever they might be. Not acting know-all, as if we take for granted that we already are adults, so we understand what's happening, but give them the dignity of being able to tell you themselves what is happening. And I mentioned this last time, let me repeat it. It's very good to give as exercises a journal to write. This can be in English or in Hindi. You have to teach a little bit how to write it. Otherwise, it's all about I brushed my teeth and I had my food and I went to sleep, right? But you can encourage them and give examples of how to express themselves, including their inner feelings, thoughts, and emotions. And how to just focus on a little bit of something that happens in the day, not give a blow-by-blow account of what happens the whole day. But journal writing at such times is one of the best ways to express your emotional needs. How to reduce stress for children is very similar, I think, and I was just talking about that when I said that you can advise parents to keep their own stress level both lower in the presence of children, but also, if there is no such scope for that, to not disguise it, hide it, or deny it either. Children are actually very sympathetic little beings, whatever size they might be, from little to adolescence, and they are completely capable of seeing the pain, the problem, or the tension of the adult. So you can do it in your own way, but parents have to be perhaps guided in that because they're not used to such proximity with their children at odd times. Parents used to go to work or whatever, and there was more distance between the parents and child. How to balance formal schooling with more progressive ideas? Well, in one sense, I'm absolutely the wrong person to ask, because my solution was to start a school of my own. I said, I can't deal with this formal schooling that exists, so why don't I just start a school to express my own progressive ideas? And that was a very tricky kind of solution. So beware of that. Try to not get into that territory. There are enough schools to join, to work with. You're welcome to join ours if you like. In other circumstances, I think that a child is very flexible, and so should a parent try to be. And the child can quite early on understand the limitations of what the school is offering. So with our own children, that means the children in our school, even in the classroom, knowing that they were aware of a larger world, which was more formal and didactic. And then we were this progressive, creative kind of world in our school. I used to say, what happens in an ordinary classroom, the question is given and then the passage is marked out, and that's the passage which the child then repeats as the answer and learns up for the exam. And very soon, as the children develop, that's just one example, they would say, ha, yeah, we understand. They could compare and contrast. They knew that there were different kinds of processes, and without becoming overly judgmental, but yes, having a critical acumen, place everything in its place. So they would know if you are doing something more progressive at home, and you're even critiquing some things that are happening in the regular school structure, and yet they have to be taught to respect, because respect is given for certain things, including the school. At the same time, they have to become critical. So you have to think about it. I'm just answering off the cuff. It needs to be thought about more. And I think I'm just trying to suggest one line of thinking, which you can follow further.
All right, thank you. Last two questions. First one is by Sonia. That you mentioned resources that bring together the local and the fantastical. So what is the importance of the fantastical in this, as a pedagogy? That was the first one. And the second one was that in what, it is by Rhythm. She's not our student, she's a friend of mine. In what ways can the teacher school use the knowledge that the child's family possesses to aid in the child's development and education? She's been trying to do this so that the notion of the school as a means to overcome the child's backwardness is negated.
Yeah. So among other people, there is a very important and interesting author called Kieran Egan, E-G-A-N, Egan. And Kieran Egan has multiple books which are about fantasy, storytelling, talking rabbits, you know, the Alice in Wonderland rabbit, and so on. And his point is that a very simple one, as I said, many people have talked about it, which is that children don't follow a linear evolution of development. In certain mathematical categories, they do, or logical mathematical categories, as Piaget called them. But for the most part, children are equally complex in their very young age as they are as they grow up. And that complexity is sometimes only expressed in games, in fantasy play, in storytelling, their love of stories, and of course when they start doing art and performance. So, and then there's this whole other approach, which is the Dewey one, the developmentalist one, in which you use the immediate surroundings of the child, like the community, you know, the workers that the child is surrounded with, who brings my milk, where does bread come from, and when do I go to the doctor, and so on. So you build from the child's identity outwards. It's all about me, then it's about my surroundings, then it's about the people around me, then it's about the city or village, then the nation, and so on, right? So that's the local. Now, each side criticizes the other, and I think there is great value to both, as I see it. And a little bit of it is because of my interest in bridging the class divide. I think that what has happened in India is that the elite, if I might call them that, the well-educated people who go to good schools, so-called good schools, elite schools, and are successful in their lives, are those who have been exposed to global knowledge, including the fantastical, all the fairy tales and the classics of the world. And village children or small town and lower class children are those who are very familiar with the local. In our school curricula, the local is often sacrificed to some kind of classical knowledge, and then we are not able to ever bridge that gap. What I'm calling for is the production of resources in which you can have the local about your river, your surroundings, geography, history, practices, professions, whatever you like, and the creation of resources with all that to bring about that element of the fantastic. By fantastic, I mean that which does not exist. And yet, it's as real as that which exists, because that's what imagination is. And children's imaginations particularly are like that. So the best things for children are tales of the fantastic. They already love them. If you know small children, they love to hear about things that don't exist and monsters and rakshas and demons and everything else. And they're interested in the local. Certainly they love their mother, father, family, and everyone else. So here's the bringing together that you need to weld, but knowing both that there is a class divide which you have to bring together, and one which in the case of every child has to be done, whichever class they belong to. How should the school use the child's knowledge? I think a little bit of what I was saying about the local is pertinent here, because the child's knowledge will always be very particular to the child. The number of people in their family, their relationships, the professions of the parents, the particular history of that family, the travels, everything in the family is what the local consists of for the child. We do a kind of using of this by actually trying to write about it. I personally, and many people at Nirman, love to write and then to get it illustrated or illustrate it in different ways. And to write about things to do with the child will already produce some kinds of resources to use in the classroom. And if that writing is all about the child's own life, then of course you have a very lovely use of the child's knowledge for school education. But you can think of many other ways. It's not just writing. You can produce resources that use as raw materials the child's life.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us. There was one last question, but because we do not have time, I'm going to ask Nita ma'am to personally respond on that later. Everyone who has stayed back until the end, thank you so much. And thank you for keeping up with our technological problems as well. As I said in the beginning of the session, I will be sharing the Milaap Fundraiser link in the chat box. So please consider making a donation. So the chat link has been put up in the chat box. And thank you so much for coming in today. Our next session is on 11th June. So if you have not signed up, please do. Bye-bye. Thank you.